Dreamcast week. Dreamcast week here on Last Call Games. 5 days of Dreamcast. Today we're going to start off with the review that I said I was going to do 2 weeks ago, and then said I was going to do last week, of WWF Attitude. I put this off for a couple reasons. One was obviously the Robin Williams thing. Second off, it's an Acclaim game. I think the best way you could describe it as that it's really just
another jabroni headed for the rock bottom.
Collision.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Picture perfect.
Acclaim is known for not making good games later on in their lifespan. And this is actually the last Acclaim WWF game. Not because they changed their name, because that wasn't for a couple years later, but because after this game, the WWF moved from Acclaim to THQ, who made the WCW games. Then the WCW games went to EA, which is why there are no WCW games on the Sega Dreamcast. None whatsoever. There's like a handful of WWF games, and there's even I think one or both of the WCW games are on the Dreamcast, but no WCW games. So, well, the THQ wrestling games were actually wrestling and grappling games. This WWF Attitude is more of a 3D fighting game in the vein of a wrestling game with wrestlers. The presentation is okay. It's nothing incredible. It's really what you would expect from an enhanced Dreamcast port. This is a port of the PS1 game, and it's one of those. You can tell it's enhanced. It's not as bad as, like, say, but it's still an enhanced port. The gameplay is where the game has some serious issues. For one thing, you pretty much need to use the D-pad for it, as for some reason it seems like the analog stick just doesn't always work for controlling movement, and the movement's in a very stiff manner in the first place, and it takes a bit of getting used to. As I said, it's more like a fighting game, which requires you to use button commands in order to execute attacks or wrestling moves, as it were. And dealing with more than one opponent at a time is almost impossible. There are a couple attacks that will hit two people, but it's really difficult to have a 2-on-1 interaction, which is why in the game's Royal Rumble mode, which simulates a yearly event for the WWF, WWE, whatever, which is 30 wrestlers go into the ring in order, and whoever is the last one in the ring wins. Not only can the game's engine not handle more than 4 wrestlers at a time, which is why, as you'll see here, the wrestlers come in, and then there's a maximum of 4, and then the next one doesn't come in until the last one's run off. And there's an odd gap, and I'm going to show this, and it's not. I didn't edit this. I did edit it into it, but I didn't make this look any worse than it does. It just doesn't. It stops for like a second and a half. Yeah, that's awkward. But going back to my earlier point, that this game, the game doesn't really do more than a one-on-one at a time. So when you're doing the Royal Rumble and there's 4 people in the ring, then it basically just becomes 2 one-on-one things, and it's really difficult to try and get both wrestlers to engage on one other wrestler, or for that one wrestler to engage the other 2. As I said, the graphics are okay. They're not amazing. The sound is good, but for some reason the wrestlers lack personality and charisma. And the thing about looking back at these older wrestling games, and older games really any sport, is that there's really only 2 groups of people. The 2 types of wrestlers. You got the legends, who are still pretty well known today, for one reason or another. You got, Stone Cold Steve Austin. The Rock is in here. Mankind, Triple H, The Undertaker. You know what I mean? And this was during the Attitude Era, obviously. And there were an awful lot of really great wrestlers. But then filling out the thing, you have a lot of people who were getting pushes from the WWF back then, because, this doesn't have the entire roster like they do nowadays. They selected these specific people based on how popular they were then. So, or what pushes they were getting and all that. The WWF kind of gets to control the popularity. But you see some of these guys like Too Sexy. I don't even remember who that is. I was following wrestling back then. There's a lot of wrestlers that you just don't know who they are, and some other really well-known wrestlers are unlocked only. Like Shawn Michaels, you have to unlock him, or Chyna, you have to unlock her. And I think she might be the only female wrestler in the game too. Whereas people like Too Sexy and I can't even remember any other ones off the top of my head. Are just they're ready to play as. The crowds are the arenas / crowds are pretty much what you would expect. They're all kind of similar. The crowd, I think, is identical, and this was during the era where the crowds weren't actual polygons. They were just like GIFs or moving sprites. So it was just like, during the entrances especially, you can definitely see that the audience is just like either one or just a bunch of pictures just moving around a little bit. It's kind of funny, but that was something you got with a lot of sports games back then, because the polygon count was so low that you couldn't bear to waste polygons on the audience. It was a thing. So, is this a good game? No, it really isn't. Is it a bad game? It really isn't. It's just really just kind of middle of the road average. It's complicated to pull off moves, and the wrestling engine isn't really a wrestling engine. It's really a 3D fighting game that has wrestlers in it. And yes, you can do pins, which is what you're supposed to do in wrestling, but the only way you can get the pins is if you knock your opponent's health down enough. So, yeah, it's basically a 3D fighting game that happens to have wrestlers in it. For that reason, WWF Attitude gets a 5 out of 10. It's not a terrible game. This is not the worst game ever made. This is not the worst Acclaim game ever made. It's probably not the worst wrestling game ever made. But it's not a great game. So stay tuned for tomorrow when we have
You smell what the Rock is
9/9. This is the Dreamcast's birthday. So we will see you tomorrow. Be there for the birthday party.